It's morning again in America, and that means I'm mourning the 2 hours and 20 minutes of my life I spent watching this horrible movie. That's time that I'm never gonna get back, and if you add in the 15 to 20 hours it's taken to write, edit, and upload this video, that means that even from beyond the grave, Ronald Reagan is still finding a way to make the life of a gay man notably worse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When I saw that there was going to be a movie called Reagan, I assumed it was going to be a somewhat honest, historical retelling of one of the most controversial presidents in American history. I was being optimistic, or naive, or, most accurately, stupid. Because Reagan boldly asked the question, what if we made a Marvel movie and the main character is Ronald Reagan? Well, then you would get this dog shit piece of film. Reagan, starring Dennis Quaid in some of the worst makeup I've ever seen, more on that later, is 140 minutes of director Robert McNamara proudly jerking off the legacy of one of the worst presidents in American history with horrible camera work and many obvious green screens. As you may be noticing, I don't have a lot of nice things to say about this movie. That's going to continue throughout the duration of this review. It fails as a biopic, it fails as a neutral retelling of history, and it fails as a movie on a very basic level. Real quickly though, my name is Patrick, but my friends call me Pat. If you like my videos, if you like my content, please give this video a like and comment, but also, please subscribe. Only 12% of you are subscribed, and when you subscribe, you help grow the channel, you help make it easier for me to make more videos, and you show my videos to more people, and you will get my videos earlier and sooner than everyone else. You know, assuming that the YouTube front page wants to be nice to me. But please subscribe. Thank you all so much. Love you all. Couldn't do it without you. I watched this movie in a theater with a capacity of about 100 people, and there were 6 other people there, including 2 elderly couples who were laughing at every Ronald Reagan one-liner, and one man sitting in the front row on his phone the entire time wearing a cowboy hat. Now I know what you're thinking. It wasn't me. Yes, I may be wearing this outfit looking like Ronald Reagan to debase myself on the internet, but I probably wouldn't leave my house dressed like it. And more importantly, don't go on your phone in the theater. It is my #1 pet peeve. I have literally broken up with somebody because they were on their phone. That's not what I told them. I just said, I'm not really feeling it. But that was the real reason. I am so sorry, engineer guy that I dated. Anyway, those older people and that cowboy hat guy seem to be the only people with actual enthusiasm for this movie. And I'm just saying that because I looked at the tickets for when the movie was having its primetime release on a Friday evening, like this should be packed if it's got enthusiasm. There was one person there, and as one of my viewers, the Mr. Guy, pointed out, they've put themselves not in the middle, but at the edge, so as to more quickly escape. And in the spirit of honesty, we've already got some in this review, I'm a gay man, obviously. But I don't have a lot of affection for the president who actively downplayed the AIDS crisis. So much is probably obvious. But for all intents and purposes, this movie is seeking to add to or define the legacy of Ronald Reagan in a historic and academic sense. Fine, fair play, let's try to look at it from that perspective. But they failed to do one thing. One very important thing, which is they don't discuss any of the failures of Ronald Reagan. Basically at all. The one failure they do bring up, the Iran-Contra scandal, they basically brush by it. Like, hey, you know, he's trying to get back the hostages. Ignore all the illegal stuff he did. It's fine. But the story of Ronald Reagan is utterly incomplete without discussing his controversies and his failures. If you're earnestly trying to make a historical biopic, you should do more than ignore. And this movie is content to do a lot of ignoring. It pretty much ignores anything that does not paint Ronald Reagan in the most saint-like of terms. This is less of a movie and more of a biblical retelling of a martyr who didn't actually exist, of the noble and Christly Ronald Reagan who died on a nuclear cross to save the country of America. Give me a break. But okay, let me break down the movie so that you, the viewer at home, can watch a better movie this weekend. Maybe go watch Borderlands. That movie is terrible, but you're still probably gonna have a better time than watching Reagan. I'm not a big Kevin Hart fan, but this movie easily would be at least 2 stars with Kevin Hart as Reagan. They both love one-liners. I think I might be cooking with this one. This movie has been in development for over 2 decades, which I'm learning is actually pretty common for a lot of conservative media projects. It turns out if you want to produce a brain-dead and unquestioning retelling of one of the most controversial presidents in American history and basically make it marketable only to conservatives, it might be a little hard to find people to give you millions of dollars to make your movie. I've already done a Marvel comparison, but this movie basically is just Tony Stark subbed in for Ronald Reagan, and although Ronald Reagan doesn't have a robotic suit, the description pretty much matches the Gipper to a T. It was originally supposed to come out like a decade ago, but they only found the funding necessary to start filming in 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, where even God tried unsuccessfully to stop this movie from coming out with a COVID outbreak. Even then, the movie was supposed to come out sometime in late 2021, where it was delayed 3 years until now. And I just have to say, it was not worth the wait. It'd be like waiting up all night for Santa Claus to come, and then he finally shows up at 1 p.m. and just pees down your chimney so he can see it trickle down. It opens in 1981 with Ronald Reagan getting shot, and then it bounces back and forth between his time in Hollywood, his time as a boy, and then his time ultimately eventually as the president. And from our perspective, it's all being narrated by a KGB agent, Viktor Ivanov, played by soft-canceled actor Jon Voight. And by the way, I'm so tired of these biopics, ideology of this horrible one aside, that feel like they have to have a narrator. Like, you saw it in Vice, which I didn't really care for, but that movie at least actually critically examines their main character, and you saw it with Elvis, where Elvis's life is narrated by racist Tom Hanks.
He's white?
And all it's really doing here is just giving the movie another couple opportunities to talk about how much communism is bad. That's right, let's just get it out of the way. A large part of this movie is basically spent talking about how horrible and evil communism is and how awesome Ronald Reagan is for defeating it, even though the Cold War ended 33 years ago. So much so that it literally, even in the opening scene, kind of leaves like a cliffhanger as to who shot Reagan. They're like, who shot Ronald Reagan? Could the Soviets have been responsible for shooting Ronald Reagan? And then it goes to the opening credits, which are basically a bunch of like scary Cold War era headlines of like, the Soviets are building nukes, Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam is communist. And it's like, are you implying that the Soviet Union tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan? Because that's what you're implying. And if you don't know the history and you're clutching your pearls like, oh, did those dirty Reds try to kill my Ronnie boy? Let me just tell you the real history, because the movie really doesn't. Ronald Reagan was shot by the 1980s equivalent of an incel named John Hinckley Jr., who thought that by shooting Ronald Reagan, he would get the attention and affection of an actress named Jodie Foster. And to give him some credit, it appears to have worked a little bit. And now he's on YouTube making videos. He's got like 40,000 subscribers, so plug to him, I guess. John Hinckley Jr. is in fact probably one of the only actual victims of cancel culture, because when he tries to book venues, his venues frequently get canceled when they learn he's the guy who tried to kill a president. So if anyone has a right to complain about cancel culture, it's actually him. Anyway, speaking of history, don't come to Reagan looking for any. Much like actual Ronald Reagan, this movie barely gives AIDS even a passing mention. So, wait. Actually, I guess in that one aspect, it is pretty historically accurate. But, and this is not an exaggeration, I honestly don't think I've ever seen a more dishonest portrayal of history in a biopic in my entire life. If this movie was telling the story of John Wayne Gacy's life, they would do it like this. They'd be like, oh, you know, John Wayne was a family man, he was married twice, he managed multiple KFC franchises like a hard-working man, and he dressed up like a clown to the delight of the local children. They would, of course, leave out the fact that he was a serial killer and murdered multiple innocent people, because that information doesn't exactly paint him in the best of lights, does it? To act as if Ronald Reagan, of all people, is a literal saint, there's a lot of Jesus in this movie, so I feel like that comparison fits, is absolutely ludicrous. Ronald Reagan is, perhaps more so than any other modern US president, responsible for one of the most debatable legacies in American history, which is, at best, controversial with mixed results, and at worst, horrible, making him one of the worst presidents ever, and is responsible with his policies for some of the modern day issues that still continue to plague America to this day. Trickle-down economics doesn't work. It's been proven not to work, and it's still going to keep not working, despite the fact that this movie puts in a cute little speech about how Reagan wants to cut taxes so people have more money, and when they have more money, everything is better. Just not how it works in reality, buddy. Because it's great to have more money if you're an average middle-class person, but if you're a wealthy person getting most of the gains from your tax policy, you are not going to take that money you save and make more jobs. You're going to make yourself a third yacht. The war on drugs is an abject disaster, and so many of the other failures and controversies of the administration were not even mentioned in the movie. Or, and this is really cute, they do a 1-minute montage during Ronald Reagan's process of seeking re-election, where they just have a bunch of clips of protesters and photos of protesters, and that's where those issues are mentioned. Okay, sorry. Watching a movie about Ronald Reagan in 2024 where they unironically do not give even lip service to issues like the AIDS crisis and the war on drugs, it's just laughable. It's gotten me a little riled up, as you can probably tell. Frankly, it's almost insulting to feature these issues for about 4 seconds each in a 60-second montage where you're talking about like, oh, Reagan's got haters, and then basically completely moving past it, not even addressing it in the story of the movie. Ugh. Anyway, let's get back to the story. So after his brush with death, where if, himbo John Hinckley Jr. had succeeded, this movie would have been a lot shorter, would have been over in like 5 minutes, we go back to his time in Hollywood, and then back to his time as a child. The movie likes to do that a lot, and seems to be under the impression that if you show a clip of young Ronald Reagan crying because his parents are arguing, I'll have sympathy for him. Nope. Try again, sweetheart. Join the frickin' club. But here we learn that Ronald Reagan was inspired to be a president because of Jesus and God, and we also meet Kevin Sorbo's character, who plays a reverend. Glad to see between God's Not Dead, where he was a horrible atheist, in this movie he's finally embraced the good book. It's a minor role, but I guess your career options are somewhat limited when you spend all your time posting conspiracy theories on Twitter. After seeing his troubled childhood, we go back to his time in Hollywood where he learned that he single-handedly stopped the communists from taking over Tinseltown. This telling of history is, shall we say, a little dubious, because it both overstates the amount of influence the Soviets had in Hollywood at the time, as well as overstating the amount of power and influence Reagan had personally in stopping them. If this sounds interesting to you, stop it. Get some help. The only thing you're missing is a lecture from your conservative uncle at Thanksgiving, yes, he's coming up again, where he talks about how socialists are evil and you should stop voting for the Democrats because of socialism. I joke about the conservative uncle a lot, but every one of those jokes is a conversation that really happened, and your boy was keeping track. It's at this point I want to say whatever they did to Dennis Quaid to make him look younger in these young Reagan sequences didn't work. He looks creepy and unsettling. He looks like if they combined a Victorian doll with a real-life human being. Or if a human being in real life was airbrushed too much like these pictures of Newt and his not at all enhanced digitally wife, Callista Gingrich. We then also see Reagan in college, played by Justin from Wizards of Waverly Place. And everyone, I watched this movie, talked about God a lot, so please, everyone join me in prayer, please. Let's all pray for David Henry. Let's pray that the Wizards of Waverly Place reboot is successful. The jobs clearly must be drying up if he is in the Reagan movie. Please, let's pray. Let's get him some work, guys. Let's get him some good roles. I don't want to see him in Mr. Bertram Season 2. I want better for him. I want better for you. Reagan then goes on to meet his eventual wife and throat goat, Nancy Reagan. Penelope Ann Miller, who portrays Nancy, described this movie as mostly a love story between Ronald and Nancy. And I'll admit, they are kind of cute together, but you gotta feel a little bit bad for Nancy, because presumably she was a human being with hopes, dreams, and agency, and you wouldn't really get that impression if you just watched this movie. Because Nancy Reagan in this movie doesn't really have a lot of agency. She's mostly like, I'll do whatever you want, darling, and she kind of exists just to be a piece of arm candy on the side of Reagan, in the background, quietly, to be seen and not heard. And when she is heard, she'll be like, like, I really feel like she was a more nuanced person in real life than this. It's really underselling the amount of work that a woman like Nancy Reagan had to do when her husband was exhibiting symptoms of Alzheimer's, arguably even during the presidency, and she had to keep it all on the hush-hush, and she did a good job. Reagan then goes on to be the governor, and they spend about 2 minutes of him doing that. In those 2 minutes, he is portrayed as someone who is universally beloved even by those pesky, radical, school student protesters. But he realizes he can't fight the communists as a governor, and he's sad about that, so he decides he has to run for president. And if you know your history, you'll know that Ronald Reagan, before he ran against Jimmy Carter in 1980, actually ran against Gerald Ford in the primary in 1976. So we spend a little bit of time on that, and we get this fun scene with all of Reagan's old white guy aides where they're like, hey, we have to win, guys, we have to win, let's bring one home for the Dipper, and then they do like a boop, and then they lose, which personally was my favorite part of the movie. I really should have walked out right there on the high point when he's just sat on the couch and he's lost. That it went downhill from there, because obviously he then goes on, roughly an hour into the movie, to win the presidency. Then the movie mostly decides to focus on that. We even see the debate between him and Jimmy Carter, which they do something very weird, which is they'll put the real image of Jimmy Carter speaking, like the actual clip of the real Jimmy Carter, then they'll cut to the debate stage, where they have like basically a body double for Jimmy Carter while Reagan is speaking. Like, why not just have the actor say the line? Why would, who, far be it from me to question these decisions. It's also almost comical, the few moments when they depict regular people in the context of all of this history, because they'll basically just have a bunch of people watching the debate. Like, people will literally stop getting their haircuts because they'll be watching Ronald Reagan do his epic, "Were you better off than you were 4 years ago?" Like, it's really laid on very, very thick. This movie is also aggressively anti-Jimmy Carter, which, I guess makes sense. His defeat is kind of central to Reagan's legacy and whatnot. But, a little bit poor taste, don't you think? This guy's been in hospice care for over a year. Although, it's probably not fair, because given how long this movie's been in development, Jimmy Carter probably was still running marathons by the time they finished that first script. Second half of the movie is focused on his presidency, and even in the context of that, is pretty much only focused on his diplomacy with the Soviet Union, which even from the movie's own perspective and retelling of history doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like, if you had no knowledge of American history whatsoever and you were only going off of what was presented by the movie, from that perspective, you would basically be like, Ronald Reagan gives like 3 speeches talking about how horrible the Soviet Union is, how we're gonna beat them, destroy them, whatnot, but then like meets the prime minister of the Soviet Union and they're best friends. Like, when he meets Gorbachev, they're like chilling. And all of the negotiation sequences they include basically have Ronald Reagan be like, no. They don't even show, like, the signing of the landmark treaty in 1987, which, by the way, a few years ago, Trump did pull out of. Just, funny coincidence, given how much the people who made this movie probably love Trump. But Reagan's big signature foreign policy treaty, no longer a thing. There's also a fun jump scare sequence where he's running for re-election and they're like, oh, I don't know if he's gonna do it, guys. I don't know if he's gonna do it, which, again, if you have any understanding of U.S. presidential history, which, I do, and I would assume probably most people going to see a Reagan movie probably do too, it's just laughable how they try to play this moment for dramatic tension. Like, obviously he wins, and he wins by a lot, and we get to see some more of his speeches. We see a lot of speeches in the movie. Then the movie kind of spiritually ends with him giving the triumphant tear down this wall speech in Berlin. Then there are also some scenes on the ranch where he has Alzheimer's and he rides horses. And then the movie actually ends. And to point something out, Dennis Quaid's impression of Ronald Reagan isn't really that good. It's funny that with all this effort and time put into this movie, the impression is really not that much better than this Whitest Kids You Know sketch.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Now, hold on. I think I might do a pretty mean Han Solo impersonation. Watch it, Chewie, there's stormtroopers around.
And I know this because in this movie's 140-minute runtime, there's like 10 minutes that are just dedicated to the speeches. This movie is already too long. I did not need to hear extended excerpts from his 1964 time for choosing speech. I just didn't need to hear that. Look, I'm gonna be nice. You can pick 2 speeches, 3 if you're being extra good. You can do a minute most from each, okay? No more, no. I know he did a lot of speeches. It's too much. Movies are not meant for many speeches spread throughout the entire movie. It's like a freaking roadblock in a highway. You just can't do that. And moreover, a lot of the filmmaking really just didn't look good at all. There were a lot of shots where it was very clear that they were filming in front of a green screen. The Marvel comparisons keep getting louder and louder. Basically anything shot outside has an incredibly weird soft focus, which is ever more noticeable because a lot of the shots outside are just the color grading. It's just off. It's too overly saturated. It really makes it look like a Hallmark movie, and I mean that in the most derogatory way I can possibly express with the English language. The acting performances are serviceable and really not worth talking about at all. The writing is horrible, but you probably already could assume that given everything I've said up to this point. What did I like about this movie? Well, there's one joke where they keep cutting to Russian leaders smoking and or drinking and then immediately cutting to their funeral. Rule of thirds, they do it 3 times. And then Ronald Reagan is like, how can I expect to talk to them if they keep dying? I thought that was funny. They also fit in a scene where Ronald Reagan's wearing his iconic beanie outfit. And when I saw that, I was like geeking in the theater. I'm like, it's the beanie outfit. It's the beanie outfit. I'm a big fan of the beanie outfit, if you couldn't tell. I also liked that it ended. I kept thinking, when is this going to end? And eventually it did. And I very much appreciated that it did end. Although apparently, according to some people on Twitter, there's a post-credit scene, which I did not see, because as soon as it ended and there was like, oh, they're doing the funeral next to the credits, I'm like, I'm out. I am out. I've been here for almost 3 hours. But yeah, that post-credit scene really proves that this is just a Marvel movie for Republican retirees. Would I recommend this movie? No. I am a worse person for having taken time out of my day to go watch this horrible piece of cinema in a nearly empty cinema. It is a mockery of history, it is a mockery of the medium of movie making itself, and frankly, it's a mockery of the whole concept of art in general. To see a figure as, in my opinion, horrible as Reagan, represented as a biblical figure with soaring orchestral music, really makes you want to vomit. But then, you know, I want to be nice to the theater employees. I would never put them in that position. If you want an understanding of history, or frankly, if you just even want mild entertainment, you unironically would be better off reading Ronald Reagan's Wikipedia page, which at least attempts to pay lip service to the idea that he wasn't the second coming of Jesus Christ. Maybe I'll do an in-depth breakdown of it when it's out of theaters, but it's really not even bad in a fun way. It's just bad. But I'm glad I got to review it and tear it apart for you all right here. But that's going to do it for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, please comment, please subscribe. All these things help me grow the channel, keep making regular uploads for you guys, 1 to 2 new videos every week. See, I'm even double dipping now to keep the quota. But comment down below, let me know your thoughts. Are you going to see this movie? If you are, comment down below. I will reply with a crisis hotline number so you can get that fixed. But have you seen it? There probably have been some of you who've seen it. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with me, disagree with me, anything I left out? Do we like Ronald Reagan? You can even let me know if I'm totally wrong, if I'm an entitled Gen Zer. Feel free to mock me. I do read every single comment. And as always, my name is Patrick, but my friends call me Pat, and I will see you for the next one.